Chapter 19. Jaron Calavan. Jaron gave the familiar security guard a knuckle bump through the front of the entrance gate to XC Energy. He swiped his access card and the gate rolled sideways. Jaron glanced at Rachel sitting in the passenger seat. She always managed to be appropriately unimpressed by the wealth of Xander Calavan. She grew up with it, but in a different way than Jaron had. Until she'd gotten sick, Rachel's mom had been Jaron's nanny. As much as he hated to think that word, nannies were women who watched spoiled children in Europe and flew on pixie dust or umbrellas. He'd gone to public schools with Rachel instead of private institutions for rich kids. He'd spent far more time with Rachel and her mom at skate parks and farmers markets and cheap amusement parks than golf courses and Rotary clubs. It was Rachel's mom who signed him up for football, who'd picked him up from the hospital when he'd needed brain surgery at 7 years old. No one was allowed in the hospital with him. Jaron remembered peeling paint on the walls, orderlies with prison tattoos, and a doctor with terrible bedside manners with a kid about to go under the knife without his dad around to hold his hand. Rachel glanced at him and then up at the open gate. He was hesitating. He was nervous, but that wasn't something he wanted Rachel to see. He lifted his foot from the brake and the car rolled through the ornamental iron gate that stood 15 feet high. The gate closed behind them, and Jaron watched it through his rearview mirror. The center of the gate had a cursive XC surrounded by a circle of intricate vine patterns. The edges were lined with black, twisted 3-inch bars. The thick top bar was curved from one side of the gate to the other. In the top center of the curve was a large black triangle with pointed ends and sides that never seemed to touch, but twisted into intricate swirling shapes within the triangle itself. Jaron had spent time trying to follow the lines of the triangle with his eyes, never quite being able to find where the bars ended, began, or connected. He used to think if he could solve the puzzle behind the triangle, he would be able to solve the puzzle of his life. He drove to the front of the parking lot and found the usual open spot right next to his father's tan Bentley. This was a spot he'd gotten used to over the summer, one he'd started to think of as his. Rachel got out of the car, but Jaron closed his eyes for a second in the driver's seat. He needed to visualize, picture the way he wanted things to go in his head. It worked for football. He could see the ball, visualize it in his hands, and it would happen, just like he saw it. Now, if he could only work the same technique on his dad. Sure, you can work for me. We'll be business partners, father and son. I love you. Jaron popped his eyes back open and jumped out of the car. Rachel was taking pictures of the front of the building for her article, so hopefully she hadn't noticed anything. He'd let his visualization get a little out of hand. His dad didn't say the word love, but in the last 2 years, Jaron was sure he'd heard it in his voice, once or twice. Jaron led Rachel through the front doors and into the lobby. Rachel paused, lifting her camera again. The entrance lobby was designed to impress. The walls were made of black granite, flecks of gold that glittered in the light and had the appearance of motion, like they had once been part of a flowing source that dried up millennia ago. This is beautiful. Rachel ran her fingers through a fountain of LED lights in the center of the room. At least the designer had good taste. I know you're angry with him, Jaron said, but just give him a chance to change his mind. Maybe you could get a job here too. We could work together. Rachel huffed. Xander has some explaining to do before I stop looking into XC Energy. A public company like this should be more open book. And his nonprofits seem like a joke. Almost nothing except a single-page website that claims he's using a satellite to counteract global warming. And that's it. You can't say you're combating global warming without telling us how. I'm sure he has to balance things. He can't have people stealing his prototypes and research. Technology is full of pirates and hackers that sell the information to the highest bidder. The elevator door opened, and Rachel and Jaron stepped inside. Yeah, but there's things you need to make public, especially when you have shares and claim to serve the people. I hope he'll answer my questions. Jaron straightened his tie as the doors closed, then scanned his keycard and hit the number 5, top level, restricted access. The rest of the employees worked on the lower levels, but Xander Calavan's office was the top story of the building. Jaron wore the Gucci suit his dad had purchased for him over the summer. Tactful yet impressive, Xander had told him as he'd handed the cashier his credit card. The elevator dinged, and Rachel stepped out first. Jaron followed. Miss Littleton was hunched over her desk, phone to her ear, speaking in a hoarse whisper. Jaron flopped onto one of the waiting couches and eyed his dad's closed office doors. "Excuse me?" Rachel said, approaching the desk. Miss Littleton startled at Rachel's voice, almost dropping the phone before catching it and putting her hand to her heart. "I'm sorry," Rachel said. "I didn't mean to startle you. I'm here to interview Mr. Xander Calavan about XC Energy for an article. I'm a student, and I have an official press pass." Miss Littleton's head was shaking before Rachel finished. "This is not a good time, young lady. Not a good time at all. You'll have to come back or pick another company for your school project." Miss Littleton put the phone back up to her ear. A tingling sensation crawled up Jaren's spine at the sound of Miss Littleton's voice. She'd worked for Xander as long as Jaren could remember, and was every bit a professional. Her dismissal of Rachel was clipped and distracted. Miss Littleton had run this office with white-gloved professionalism and could calm a businessman about to lose his investment, but today she seemed rattled. "What's going on?" Jaren stood up, and Miss Littleton jumped a second time. This time her attempts to catch her phone didn't work, and it fell beneath her desk. "Jaren," Miss Littleton said, gathering up papers on her desk and closing her appointment book. "I didn't see you back there. Nothing's going on. It's just not a good time for an interview. You know how your dad gets when he's in one of his moods. He's got a bee in his bonnet and won't do anything else until he gets it settled. I'm sure you can find plenty of information on the internet to write your essay." "This isn't an essay," Rachel said, placing both hands on the counter like she was planting roots. "This is an official news article." Miss Littleton was trying to find her phone on the floor while keeping her eyes on them. "Not today, sweetie. I'm sorry. Mr. Calavan's schedule is full." She gave up her blind floor sweep with her hand. She stood and came around the front counter, arms wide, to herd them toward the elevator doors. Rachel didn't move. Jaren pushed past Miss Littleton, unable to keep the panic he felt in his stomach from rising into his throat. Why would Miss Littleton try to keep him away from his dad? "He asked not to be disturbed," said Miss Littleton as she turned one hand out like she could pull him back with the power of her mind. Jaren waved her off and pushed open the double door. Xander Calavan's office was usually the picture of minimalism and taste, but today there were several file boxes on the floor and 2 more on the desk. Folders and papers were scattered on the surface. Xander flipped through one as he sat on the edge of his chair, muttering. For a moment, Jaren stopped. He found it hard to swallow. He didn't know why the sight of his dad shuffling through a mess of paperwork would trigger fear. He tried to shake it off. "Looks like we're getting audited. Did you forget to file your taxes?" He laughed, but it sounded as hollow as it felt. Xander slammed the file closed and stood too quickly. He knocked one of the boxes from his desk, and the files slid across the floor, creating a line to the window. Rachel pushed Jaren to the side so she could see in. Miss Littleton came up behind them, clucking her tongue. No, you need to leave. I told you, it's not a good time." "It's all right, Miss Littleton. I can take care of this." Xander put up his hand and straightened his shoulders, fighting an invisible weight that cramped his usually perfect posture. "What can I do for you, Rachel? Jaren?" Xander folded his arms, but not before Jaren saw a slight tremor in his father's hands. "I'm doing an article on XC Energy," Rachel said, "and wondered if you'd be willing to answer a few questions for me. There are a lot of things about the company that doesn't add up, and you haven't published any useful information. It's all marketing mumbo-jumbo." "An article?" Xander's eye twitched, his neck tensed, a vein bulging. "You're researching XC Energy. Now?" "Yes, sir," Rachel said. She wrapped her arms around the notebook she was carrying, like an official reporter, upping her intimidation 2 levels. Jaren would have admired the strength in her stance if he hadn't been so baffled by his dad's reaction. "What's going on?" Jaren asked for the second time. "Is the business in some kind of trouble?" Xander came around the desk and shut the door, leaning against it as he turned to face them. "Listen, I can't give you any details. I can't answer any questions. All you need to know is that you need to be careful." "Careful of what?" Rachel's fingers twitched, and Jaren could tell she was resisting the urge to start writing. "I will only give you 1 warning, and then I am not responsible for what happens." Xander stepped forward, forcing Rachel to take a step back. "Clear your browser history. Don't ask any more questions. Don't write the article. It's not a good time." Jaren had never seen his dad like this. He'd seen the football fan version, the business tycoon version, even the aloof father that couldn't give him the time of day version. But this was something different. "But Mr. Calavan," Rachel started. Jaren interrupted her. "Fine." Jaren gave Rachel big eyes, trying to communicate without saying anything. "She won't. She'll stop, But if you're overwhelmed, I could come in after school or do some extra work. He walked over to the toppled box of files and started picking up the papers. If you need me to go through some old files from... Jaren looked at the dates on the paper. From 15 years ago, I'm sure I could help you out. No. Xander's voice was hard, cold, and reached no argument. He glanced at the door like he expected the Grim Reaper to walk in. Get out, both of you. Get out now, or I'll call security and have you escorted out. I have a press. I don't give a damn. Xander pounded his fist against the desk, making papers hop and a pen roll off and land on the floor. Jaren froze as he reached for another file. He couldn't imagine a pressure that would make his dad lose his cool. Jaren's gut twisted. Get out, Xander said, his words going soft but no less scary. Don't come back here. It's too dangerous, and I don't want either of you getting hurt. He ripped the papers from Jaren's hands and shoved Jaren toward the door. Rachel's fingers tightened on her notebook. You never give a damn about anyone or anything. I know better than anyone you could care less who you hurt. She turned with a flip of her hair. Don't let her dig any deeper. Xander's voice was almost a whisper this time. Not a command. It was a plea. I don't understand, Jaren said. I want to be part of your business. I want to work with you. This business isn't for you. Xander checked the doorway again, but Rachel was already over by the elevator. He glanced around the room like he was looking for hidden cameras. His fingers drummed on the desk. Then his eyes landed fully on Jaren for the first time since they'd walked into the room. His fingers stopped moving. The tightness in his face loosened, the stress draining from him as he made a decision. I'm cutting you off. No inheritance, no shares. I built this company from the ground up with my energy, my blood, my life. Xander's voice caught for an instant. You have to make your own way in life. Jaren's throat constricted. His lungs felt on fire. A sharp pain started at the base of his skull, but he ignored it. You can't. I can. And I just did. Now, leave. Xander took a step toward him, and Jaren stumbled back. Jaren wanted to argue, but there was a sting in his eyes that he was struggling to blink away. He didn't cry. Ever. Xander had taught him that. Jaren turned sharply and moved into the waiting room. Wait. Jaren stopped. He glanced back at his dad. Xander's entire frame seemed to melt as the stiffness drained from his body. He leaned forward, supporting himself with his palms flat against the desk. Jaren, accept the scholarship to play football. Things have changed, and this is not the best future for you. There is no future at all. I want you to get as far away as you can. Please. Miss Littleton closed the doors to the office and stood with her back to them, her head shaking. There was a ding as the elevator doors opened, and Jaren followed Rachel inside. The image of his dad's hunched shoulders remained burned into his vision as the elevator doors closed. He'd seen that look before, but never from his dad, never in that office, and never so complete. It was the look of defeat.